You belong in the trash, old woman. This house is mine now." The words didn't echo, they landed flat and heavy, like the sound of her suitcase hitting the wooden boards. I had just finished making his breakfast. The pan was still warm and the coffee hadn't cooled. He didn't even glance at it. Jared stood in the doorway with his phone in one hand and rage in the other. The door slammed so hard behind him that the glass in the side panel shivered. I stood on the porch, blinking against the sudden quiet. Across the street, the neighbor's dog started barking, but no one came out. The suitcase he threw out was one I hadn't touched in years. I recognized the scuff on the corner from a trip to Denver after his high school graduation. It was half-zipped, as if packed in a hurry by someone who didn't know where I kept my sweaters. My fingers closed around the house keys. They shook. Not from fear, just the weight of it all. I looked down at the porch boards I repainted last spring. Jared hadn't helped. He was too busy. I had done it on my knees with old gloves and a cheap brush. Now they creaked under my steps as I moved to pick up the suitcase. Inside, I could still hear his voice, bright, rehearsed. "Yeah, she's out now. We can finalize the walkthrough Monday." A pause. "No, she won't come back." I made sure. I turned away before he saw me looking. The wind tugged at my coat as I walked down the front path, past the garden bed I once planted, with asters now overtaken with weeds. At the end of the street, I paused. The house stood under a low gray sky, its windows blank and unfamiliar. Just a building now, not a home. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase handle and kept walking toward the car I had parked 3 houses away, just in case. I didn't go far. Just outside Salem, there's a motor lodge I remembered from years back, the kind with a flickering neon sign and a lobby that smells like reheated coffee. I signed in under my maiden name out of habit, more than fear, and asked for a room facing the back lot. Less traffic, fewer eyes. Once inside, I set the suitcase down gently. It didn't have much, just enough to prove I hadn't planned for this, even though maybe I should have. I pulled out my old ledger, the one I used when I still did bookkeeping for neighbors around the block. The cover was cracked, but the pages were crisp. I started writing. Every mortgage payment, every insurance renewal, roof repairs, plumbing upgrades, property tax receipts. 34 years of living written in tidy columns of black ink. I didn't cry, I just calculated. Numbers don't lie. My phone buzzed. I let it ring twice before checking. Voicemail. "Hey, Mom, you overreacted, okay? The house is already in my name anyway. You don't have to make this a thing." I stared at the screen until it went dark. He had said the papers were for a roof loan. He'd stood in the kitchen and told me, "It's just to get the rate down. Sign here." He smiled like it meant nothing. And I signed. I didn't even ask for a copy. Now I opened my laptop connected to the motel's weak Wi-Fi and found the county property records. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My breath caught as the page loaded. There it was, a quitclaim deed filed 3 months ago. Jared Nash grantee. My name gone. I closed the laptop slowly. Then I opened the suitcase and pulled out the tin box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, the original deed stamped and notarized. My marriage license. My husband's will. His old fountain pen still capped. I placed them on the desk one by one like I was setting a table for someone who would never come home. Then I reached for my phone again. I waited until mid-morning, then drove back. Jared's car was gone, just like I knew it would be. He kept a routine even while playing the villain tennis on Tuesday's showings in the afternoon. I parked a block away, same as before, and walked the rest in silence. The spare key was still taped behind the electrical box. He hadn't changed the locks. Not yet. The back door stuck a little like always. Inside, everything felt colder, like the walls had pulled back from the floorboards. My coat brushed against the dining chair, the one I used to sit in with coffee and crossword puzzles. It was dusty now, pushed against the wall. I didn't stay long. I crossed the yard to the garden shed. The wooden latch groaned when I opened it, and the smell of damp earth rose to meet me. In the back corner, beneath a warped plank of flooring, I pried up the board with a screwdriver I'd tucked into my coat pocket. The envelope was still there, wrapped in plastic, just as we'd left it. I brought it into the light and sat on an overturned bucket to open it. Inside was the copy of the deed, dated, stamped, notarized. But this one held more than my name. Halfway down the second page was the clause my husband had added years before I understood why. The occupant, Delora Nash, retains lifetime residency rights regardless of any subsequent transfer of title. I read it once, then again. The ink hadn't faded. I smiled just barely. Jared had erased my name on a form, but not on the law. He hadn't read the fine print. He didn't know what I kept beneath the floor, what we had quietly prepared for. I slipped the file into my tote bag, locked the shed, and left before the wind could shift. Back on the road to Salem, I called the county clerk's office. The woman on the line took her time, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. "Yes, ma'am. That clause holds." So I kept driving. Straight to someone who could use it. The legal aid office smelled like old books and floor polish. I sat in the chair across from a young man in a navy suit, too stiff for his posture. He introduced himself as Davis. Fresh out of law school, probably. But he listened. Really listened. I laid everything out between us, the deed with my name, the fake one with Jared's, the clause my husband had added years ago, the banking records I'd flagged, and a timeline written in my own hand. Davis read in silence, flipping one page after the other. His brows tightened as he went. "This is more than messy," he said finally. "It's fraud. Plain and simple." He filed a forged quitclaim deed and attempted to assume control of a property you legally still possess. That clause makes the house unsellable without your signature. I exhaled long and slow. He wasn't saying anything I didn't suspect, but hearing it in his voice, a younger man, sharp and certain, made it real. "They can't evict you," he continued. "They don't own full title. You hold possession. That's the leverage." I nodded. "Then I want 3 things prepared." He clicked his pen ready. First, a formal revocation of any power of attorney I never signed. Second, an injunction notice to freeze the title, prevent him from trying this again. Third, a letter to whatever agent he's working with. They need to know they're tangled in fraud. He looked up, impressed. "You've done your homework." "I kept records," I said simply. He never thought I'd need them. "We'll serve everything by end of week." He offered to walk me out, but I told him I could find the door. Outside, the sky was still overcast, but my steps felt steady, for the first time in days. In my purse, folded with care, were the first clean pages of this new chapter. Names, dates, deadlines, all written in a language Jared never bothered to learn. I turned toward the corner bus stop, already thinking about what else he might have tried to take. 2 days passed before Jared's number flashed across my phone again. I stared at it until the ringing stopped, then played the voicemail. His tone was sugar-coated, too smooth to be real. "Mom, where are you? We can fix this. You don't have to make things ugly." I waited until the beep sounded, then called back and said only 4 words. "Check your mail, Jared." That was all. By late afternoon, the messages started coming, one after another. The first was confused, the next defensive, and by the 5th, he was spitting through his teeth. "What did you do? You can't undo paperwork. That lawyer doesn't know anything. You're ruining this." I didn't reply. I didn't even listen to all of them. I just let them pile up, one angry voice layered over another, until the phone went silent. That night, I was sitting by the motel window watching rain slide down the glass when it rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but answered out of habit. Mrs. Nash, a nervous voice, asked, "This is Ethan, the agent representing your son. I just wanted to apologize." We received a legal notice today. It says there's a dispute on the title. Until it's cleared, the sale is frozen. I said nothing. The sound of paper shuffling came through the line, then a deep sigh. I had no idea, ma'am. I'm sorry this happened. Not your fault, I said softly. You were misled. He thanked me for my time and hung up quickly, embarrassed, maybe even frightened of what he'd been part of. Outside, the rain thickened into a steady hum. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, listening to the sound of it striking the pavement. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped. In the distance, a thunderclap rolled over the city, deep and low. I watched the reflection of the motel sign flicker against the window, the word vacancy glowing red against the dark. It felt fitting. There was room now for something new to begin. I spent the morning with my checkbook open and every bank statement laid out like pieces of a broken clock. The numbers didn't add up, not because they were large, but because they were consistent. 40 here, 62 there, $95 always marked transfer. It wasn't random, it was planned. Small enough to slip under notice, frequent enough to matter. Jared had offered to help set up my online banking when the site updated last year. I'd let him. He'd written down the password, said he'd keep things running smoothly, just in case he told me. I believed him. I'd always believed him. Now I didn't. I drove to the branch where I'd opened my first account with my husband after we were married. It hadn't changed much, same Ivy crawling the brick wall, same teller who remembered my name. The manager met me in a small side office with glass walls. I showed her the suspicious withdrawals. She printed a full transaction log. Each withdrawal matched the days Jared had stopped by to check in. She asked, "Would you like to freeze the account?" I shook my head. Not yet. Let him try again. Instead, I opened a new account under my maiden name. I transferred most of the funds, left just enough behind to keep the old account active, and set up automatic alerts for any login or transaction. Back at the motel, I made myself tea and opened my laptop. I scrolled through photos, my husband in his workshop, smiling over burnt toast in our old kitchen, standing in front of the house Jared now tried to sell. Then the notification came. Unauthorized access attempt. Flagged. Logged. I stared at the alert, felt the calm settle over me like evening fog. There was no panic, only confirmation. I closed the browser and looked at the single framed photo I'd brought with me. The two of us on the porch barefoot before the paint had faded and the fights had started. I whispered to no one, "Got you." And then I opened my notebook again, ready for the next name to write down. I hadn't meant to drive by. The route to the courthouse detoured through familiar streets, and before I realized, there I was, 2 turns away from the place I used to call home. The sign was hard to miss. Pending sale. Canceled, printed in bold red across the white board, staked into my front lawn. My name may not have been on the new deed, but it was still written in every nail, every inch of trim. Every sleepless night, I worked extra shifts to pay the next mortgage. Jared stood on the curb in that same gray jacket he'd worn to my last birthday, when he said he'd been too busy to stay for cake. Now he was arguing with a woman in heels too high for that pavement. Her hair bounced as she shouted something sharp, something final. She turned and walked off, fast keys in hand. He threw his phone onto the grass like it might undo the damage. I parked a block away, engine idling, hands still on the wheel. I didn't move until she drove off and Jared disappeared inside. He looked smaller, not just from distance. I didn't knock. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted quiet. 2 hours later, I reached May's cabin near the edge of Lake Larimer. The sky stretched wider there, and the water never rushed. May opened the door without a word, just stepped aside to let me in. I set down my bag, laptop, and folder of documents, everything I had carried out of that house, except for the grief. We sat with tea. I told her everything. Every lie, every paper trail, every missed call I hadn't returned. She didn't gasp or shake her head. Just said, "You're stronger than you look." I stared out at the lake. "Numbers don't lie," I said. "People do." She refilled my cup without asking. I took my tea and settled by the window, the same way I had in motel rooms, but this time with someone nearby who understood silence didn't mean surrender. The surface of the lake didn't ripple. It held its line steady. The call came just after lunch. I'd just poured a second cup of coffee when Davis's name lit up the screen. The district court accepted the complaint, he said. "The forged quitclaim deed is officially null. You're still the legal occupant, and Jared's about to find that out." He paused. "They've flagged it as potential financial elder abuse. There will be an investigation. If they pursue it fully, he could face restitution and even charges." I sat down slowly, cradling the phone between my cheek and shoulder. "What happens next?" I asked. "I'd advise staying away from the property until notice is served. Once he realizes he's lost control, he'll panic. Let the process do its work. You've already done yours." I thanked him. He didn't say congratulations, and I didn't expect it. This wasn't a celebration. It was repair. That night, a storm rolled in from the north, the kind with wind that didn't bother to knock, just shouldered through trees and hammered the windows. May had gone to bed early. I stayed up in the front room, listening to the rain pelt the cabin's tin roof. I thought about the night he threw my suitcase on the porch. I remembered the way the wood groaned beneath my feet, how the boards I'd painted last spring seemed to lean away from me like even they'd been warned. I remembered not crying. I opened my notebook, same one I'd used to write out every withdrawal, every legal note, and wrote a single line. "I will never be the woman who begs for a place in her own home again." I closed the cover, rested my hand over it like a folded promise, and leaned back into the quiet that always followed thunder. It was deeper here, out by the lake, less about fear, more about finality. Somewhere, miles away, Jared's phone might be ringing. He wouldn't answer right away. He'd read the notice once, maybe twice, and then he'd start dialing. But I wouldn't be there. And neither would the door he thought he controlled. The papers were delivered before noon. Davis had sent me a quick update served at 11:46 a.m. Witness confirmed. He read them. By 2 o'clock, my phone started ringing. At first, I thought it might be Davis again, maybe an update or follow-up instructions. But it was Jared. His name flashing on the screen like it still meant something. The first call went to voicemail. So did the next 3. I didn't listen. I didn't have to. 10 missed calls by mid-afternoon. Then 20, then 38. He didn't space them out. He just kept hitting redial, like persistence might undo consequence. By call 50, I turned off the ringer. I didn't want to know what version of himself he was cycling through, begging, sun-raging victim, smooth talker. They were all masks I'd seen before. The man who threw my suitcase out didn't deserve an audience now. Around 6, Davis called. "He's trying to reach you," I confirmed with a nod he couldn't see. "The injunction is in effect," he said. "You're not obligated to speak to him. And frankly, you shouldn't. Let it play out through the channels we've set." I thanked him and hung up. May reheated soup while I sat by the window, the sky outside still damp from the storm. The lake had turned a pale slate calm now, as if the water had forgotten how to thrash. The phone lit up again. Call Nur 72. I watched it buzz quietly on the wooden table beside my cup, then reached over and turned it face down. Across the room, May looked up from the stove. "Aren't you going to answer?" I shook my head, slow and steady. "He'll hear from the right people soon enough." She didn't ask again. Neither did I. The last call died without a voicemail. The air was still. The phone stayed dark, and I stayed quiet. A month passed without ceremony. No courtroom drama, no shouting matches, no last-minute apologies. Just signatures, filings, silence. The case closed quietly. Jared didn't contest. He couldn't. The evidence stood taller than his excuses. The title reverted back to my name, clean and legal, with the life estate clause intact. He lost the house. He lost his fiancée. And I didn't gloat. I didn't move back in either. There are some walls you don't repaint, even if they're yours. I worked with a local agency to lease the place background checks references, quiet renters who respected a garden and paid on time. The first month's deposit arrived a week later. The second followed without delay. Steady, dignified, separate. On a Sunday morning, I drove back. Not to reclaim anything, just to witness what remained. The maple tree in the front yard had grown wide over the years. I remember when my husband planted it barely a branch, then just hope with roots. Now 2 children played underneath it, chalk drawings across the sidewalk, giggling as their mother watched from the porch. The house didn't look sad anymore. It looked lived in. I stepped out quietly and approached the porch, careful not to startle anyone. From my coat pocket, I took out a small ceramic bird. It used to sit above the stove, one of those things you stop noticing after a while until it's gone. I placed it gently on the porch rail. The tenant looked up and smiled. "Nice touch," she said. "Feels like it belongs here." I nodded. It always did. Back in the car, I didn't look at the house in the mirror. I didn't need to. I knew what was still standing. The drive to May's cabin was long but peaceful. The radio stayed off. The windows were cracked just enough to let in the late spring air. No bitterness, no noise, just a clean line from what had been to what would come next. By the time I reached the lake, I already knew what I'd unpack first.